Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to wait just a few moments to allow everyone to come in, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, so as we wait for everyone to join, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this part of our program. So first of all, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is the next program in our Taking Action Together series. My name is Hannah Siegel, and I am the social media and marketing coordinator here at the AHEC. I must first start by giving a huge thank you to Larry and Cinda Goldberg, Jeffrey and Gail Bayer, Ronnie and Donald Hess for their incredible sponsorship of this program. It would not be possible without their support. We also have many partners who have helped us spread the word that are listed on our website. So thank you to those people. I'm very thankful for also our team today, including our wonderful executive director, Lisa, Caleb, who is helping us on the back end, our director of education, Amy, and everyone else for their support, big and small. Today's program is brought to you in special partnership with the JCRC. We're so grateful to Joyce Shevin and the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Birmingham Jewish Federation for their collaboration. The AHEC and the JCRC continue to work closely and collaboratively to educate about and address anti-Semitism in our Birmingham community. So before we get started, there are a few important housekeeping items to address. We will be saving time at the end of this presentation so that our speaker can answer your questions. So in order to do that, you will go to the bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A button. To submit a question, you click on that button and you input any question that you might have. Also, please note that this program is being recorded, and we hope that you will share the recording with your friends who are not able to attend today. Also, we are happy to provide these events at no cost to our community. So if you enjoy today's program, we would greatly appreciate a donation of any size, excuse me, that will enable us to continue providing this important content. You can visit our website to easily make a gift, and we will be putting a link in the chat later. So without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce you to Vlad Khaykin. Vlad Khaykin is a distinguished expert renowned for his knowledge in the fields of anti-Semitism, extremism, discrimination, and diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. With a reputation that extends worldwide, Vlad's expertise has been sought after by government agencies, NGOs, Fortune 500 companies, educational institutions, and prominent media outlets. He has nearly 2 decades of influential roles at the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, the American Jewish Community Committee, or JC, a former refugee from state-sponsored anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union and the grandson of Holocaust survivors. Vlad's approach to the ADL's work is deeply personal. Our goal in holding these programs is to provide you all with at least one thing that you can take away and put into action. After hearing today's program, I am confident that you will find at least one thing that you can do. Please join me in welcoming Vlad.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be here with you all to speak about a topic that is so deeply important today, so timely, and one that is, as you heard, very personal for me. As was said, I was born in the Soviet Union, and some of you might know the story of Soviet Jews. We were subjected to a regime that was hostile to Jewish life, Jewish culture, the Jewish religion, and imposed all manner of impositions on Jews, on our ability to thrive as a community, and so on. And a propaganda played a really big part of that. So I've been fascinated by the topic of anti-Semitism as a form of disinformation, as a form of propaganda, because it is something that has so radically upended my life, that of my family, that of my community, from the pogroms to which my great-great-great-grandparents were subjected in the Pale of Settlement, to the Holocaust, where I lost most of the branches of my family tree, to the Soviet regime that I already mentioned. Propaganda was central to what ultimately, the calamity that ultimately befell Jews in all of these instances and many more around the world. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump right in. There's a lot of content that I want to share with you today, so I don't want to waste any more time. So I'm going to share my screen, share sound. Perfect. Okay. So when we talk about anti-Semitism, we're talking about not just a form of social prejudice. We're really talking about a kind of interpretive model or an analytical framework, something that helps us understand or alleges to help us understand why the world looks the way it does and not the way that that we hope it would, that we wish it would, etc. So I want to start there, right, to sort of reframe our understanding of what anti-Semitism is. It's really a theory about how the world works, right? It's not merely a social prejudice or a form of racial animus or an anti-religious bigotry. It's all of those things. But really, it's a kind of conspiracy theory that alleges to explain the world, right? Now, when we're talking about anti-Semitism in the world today, we're talking about a period of historically high levels of anti-Semitism, certainly in the United States, but also around the world. As you can see on screen, over the last decade or so, we've seen really an explosion of anti-Semitic incidents across the country, from a low of 750 incidents in 2013 to nearly 3,700 by 2022. And this represents really the highest number that we've ever tracked on record, right? So a 500% increase in the last decade to historically high levels. Now, we also saw an additional spike in anti-Semitic incidents post 10/7, right? A 360% increase over and above what was already a historically high level of anti-Semitism, right? So we're really, seeing historically high levels of anti-Semitism. And then, of course, anytime there's a conflagration between Israel and its neighbors, you also see spikes in anti-Semitism, just as we're seeing right now here today. In the 3 months following 10/7, there were nearly as many anti-Semitic incidents across the country as there were in all of 2022, which again was the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents that we've ever tracked in the many, many decades that we've been tracking anti-Semitism here at ADL. Now, again, people, human behavior is determined by what we believe about ourselves, about the world, about our place in it, other people with whom we share the world, matters of right and wrong, justice and injustice, all of those kinds of things, right? And so it's important to look not only at incidents, but also at rates of belief that drive those behaviors, those actions, and policies. And so we at ADL have been tracking anti-Semitic beliefs since 1964. And as you can see, over the decades following the 60s, there was a pretty precipitous decline in the rates of anti-Semitism among the U.S. Populace, or at least the number of people who are willing to admit to holding anti-Jewish prejudices, ideas, believing in anti-Jewish conspiracy theories and stereotypes and so on. So from a high of 29% in 1964 down to a low of just 9% in 2014. Now, I say just 9%. Of course, that's still millions of Americans, right? In a country as large as ours, even small percentages mean quite large numbers of people. But still, certainly 9% is far better than the 29% we saw in 1964. Now, unfortunately, the last time we studied this was in 2019 during the sort of right before the pandemic hit, and that number stood at 11%. When we studied this issue again, that number had nearly doubled from 11% to 20% of the U.S. population that is deeply infected with anti-Jewish ideas, beliefs, stereotypes, conspiracy theories, etc. Now, I wish I had good news for you, but just about a week and a half ago or so, we released the latest findings from this research. And what do you know? It jumped again to now nearly 1/4 of the U.S. population that is deeply infected, believes at least 6 out of the 11 sort of stereotypes, tropes about Jews controlling, financial markets, Wall Street, not caring what happens to anyone but their own kind, being responsible for most of the world's wars, et cetera, right? So to count in these percentages, you had to agree with at least 6 or more of these 11 anti-Jewish stereotypes. So again, not only are we living through historically high levels of anti-Semitic incidents in our country, those incidents are being driven by historically high levels of anti-Semitic belief. Now, when we talk about the evolution of propaganda, right, we can start looking in during the Middle Ages, when we have, an age of mass illiteracy, right? Most people cannot read. And so during this period, it's really, visual propaganda is really important. Anti-Semitic ideas are communicated through illuminated manuscripts, through church reliefs, right? Those sorts of things, right? So here's an example of a church relief of what's called the Judensau, and you see this Jewish person depicted as sort of suckling the teat of this pig. It was a way to insult Jews, right? Of course, thinking again about kosher laws, a way to insult Jews, a way to associate them with perversion, with sort of uncleanliness, right? All of these kinds of things. You have the spread of ideas about how Jews desecrate the host, right? The body of Christ, commit, the blood libel, right? The notion that Jews kill Christian children and drain their blood to use in various demonic ceremonies, as you see in the manuscript on the left, and so on. Now, with the evolution of the mass communication with the printing press, we entered a new era where, people with anti-Semitic ideas were able to spread those ideas far and wide in ways they couldn't previously, right? So we had, for example, the infamous work of Martin Luther, the father of the Protestant Revolution, popularizing ideas about Jews as liars, deceivers, the enemies of Christ, right? People who hate Christianity and want to destroy it, and so on. Perhaps the most influential and certainly infamous example of sort of printed propaganda literature that is from the sort of history of anti-Semitism is the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, created in the at the turn of the 19th to 20th century, probably by the intelligence services of the Tsarist regime in Russia, as a way to undermine various kinds of movements to challenge the power of the monarchy. Many of the ideas that are popular today within this sort of anti-Semitic imagination, the ideas that Jews control the media, they control the banking systems, they control various kinds of social and political movements. All of those ideas were popularized by the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which has really become a kind of blueprint for many of the modern conspiracy theories with which we're familiar today. It is one of the most widely distributed pieces of propaganda and one of the most widely distributed pieces of literature in general in the world. It's been translated into dozens of languages, has sort of editions in every country for the last 100 some odd years, and continues to sort of spin off various new conspiracy theories that pertain to the politics of the day, the zeitgeist of the era, and so on. Now, the next era in the evolution of propaganda was the advent of radio, right? And this was also used to great effect by anti-Semites. I want to highlight here in the United States one particular individual known as the radio priest. Father Charles Coughlin was a Catholic priest who was he was a fascist, right? So a far-right sort of demagogue. He was pro-Nazi, anti-Jewish. He blamed Jews for all of the woes of the United States from his vantage point, blamed them for communism, blamed them for, various injustices, economic and other. He was a charming individual who said things like, when we get through with the Jews in America, they'll think the treatment they received in Germany was nothing, right? I also want to highlight that he also availed himself of the printing press as well, quite to great effect. He had a publication that I wanted to highlight for you all, and this publication was really focused on exposing the Jews and their various machinations and how they are harming the world, certainly harming America. And this publication was called Social Justice, right? And that might ring familiar to some of you, given how some of the anti-Semitic propaganda today sort of frames itself as a kind of social justice politics. Now, with the advent of film, right, moving picture and sound, you enter a really new sort of era of potent propaganda. The Nazis, in particular, used this to great effect. They really understood the power of film as a form of mass influence. And among the first steps they took when they came to power was to seize control of the film industry, to purge Jews and Jewish influence from films. So on June 30th, 1933, German law formally banned Jews and other undesirables from the film industry. And this was one of the first industries from which Jews were purged in Germany. And the interesting thing here is that the Nazis purged an imaginary Jewish conspiracy to control the media in order to further their goals of a global domination, to install an actual conspiracy, right, to control the media to further ambitions of global domination by the Nazis themselves, right? And anti-Semitism oftentimes has this aspect of inversion, right? It takes reality and sort of turns it on its head and weaponizes it against Jews. So film was really, really important for the Nazis as a form of mass influence, so important, in fact, that filmmakers were considered soldiers of the Reich and excused from frontline service. All right, so Goebbels understood, he really loved film as a form of propaganda. He really understood that, the best propaganda is that which isn't perceived as propaganda at all, right? We put up walls, sort of filters, right? When we know that we're trying to be influenced, that people are trying to influence us, we sort of put up some guards, right, against that. But when it's perceived as entertainment, we let our guard down and become more susceptible, therefore, to influence, right? So the Nazis used film quite effectively to demonize Jews, to dehumanize Jews, to paint them as the enemies of the nation, as a threat to the German people, their way of life, etc. And this really, sort of laid forth the psychological conditioning that was necessary to produce the mass consent and collaboration that was necessary in the mass murder of European Jewry, what was subsequently called the Holocaust. So one film I wanted to highlight was Theresienstadt. And now we oftentimes think of propaganda and disinformation as aimed at convincing us to believe falsehoods, right? To convincing us that things that aren't true are true. But propaganda and disinformation is really intended to shape the way we see the world in multiple different kinds of ways. And that includes also getting us to disbelieve things that are true, right? So Theresienstadt was an example of that. It was intended to discredit reports that the Nazis were committing genocide against Jews and other minority populations in Europe. Right, so they took various images from ghettos and concentration camps that were staged to paint a sort of rosy, idyllic picture of almost resort-like existence for Jews in these camps. Right, there were images of people doing theater and taking nice walks in lovely sort of locales. Right, there were coffee houses, modern healthcare facilities, musical entertainment, etc. Of course, the reality was that the conditions were quite brutal. Most of those that passed to Theresienstadt, over 140,000 individuals, were eventually deported to Nazi killing centers, and tens of thousands who were imprisoned in these transitional camps also died while imprisoned there because of the brutal conditions. Now, the Soviets also used film to great effect. They understood the power of film and the power of organizing events around film and other sort of spectacles, right? So in the Soviet Union, the state fully controlled the film industry and employed it like the Nazis. as a tool of mass influence, but not only within the Soviet Union, but globally. One of the things they did was to stage various kinds of cultural events, public programs, including film festivals, where these were important propaganda opportunities, where they could utilize film in order to sort of spread certain ideas, right? In particular, one of the sort of most impactful, I think, was the Afro-Asian Film Festival in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. For their motto, their slogan was of the film festival was "For peace, social progress, and the freedom of the people." And it was at this film festival in 1974 where the very first film of Palestinian cinema premiered. Of course, under the aegis of the PLO. And the themes of this film were Zionist atrocities in occupied territories, where they alleged that Jews were committing various kinds of atrocities against the Palestinian people, and so on. Again, images and ideas that have become quite familiar for us today. So I actually want to show you a piece of a propaganda film, not the film that I mentioned, but a different film called "The Plans and Deeds of Zionists: the Secret and Explicit," from 1973. So with your permission, I'm just going to show you a short clip of that film and just pay attention to how familiar some of these themes about Zionists and Zionist conspiracy seem.
Так началась сионистская колонизация Палестины. Сионисты навязывали арабам всевозможные сделки, и сделки эти по своему цинизму напоминали соглашения, которые заключали первые американские колонисты с простодушными индейцами. Миролюбивые арабы гостеприимно принимали поселенцев, не подозревая о той участи, которая им была уготована сионистами. Первые поселения могли существовать только благодаря субсидиям богатых европейских евреев. Но все дело сводилось к использованию дешевой арабской рабочей силы, признавались сами же сионисты. Так было в начале, так было и потом. Вот военизированное поселение кибуц имени Усышкина. Старый сионист Усышкин приехал сюда сам, чтобы полюбоваться, как этот лагерь обносит колючей проволокой. Делается это под охраной. Не стоит удивляться. Сионисты поселяли своих людей на чужой земле, которые отбирали и силой, уничтожая порой целые селения палестинцев. В вооруженных тайных организациях молодых евреев учили презирать арабов, убивать их при каждом удобном случае.
So we see a lot of themes, right, that are familiar to us today. If you go on social media today, you'll see these themes about, Zionism as a form of European colonialism, that these were foreign people that had no history in the land of Israel or Palestine, coming to dispossess the native sort of inhabitants, right? There's the comparison to the indigenous Americans, right? There's various notions comparing, right, visually and in terms of the rhetoric, comparing these Zionist movement to the Nazi movement. At one point, you see people wearing the sort of Nazi helmets, right? You see the images of the camps surrounded by barbed wire. All of that, of course, is intentional. And again, we see so many of these themes, comparisons between Zionism and fascism or Nazism, right? The ideas of Zionist colonialism or imperialism. All of these are very familiar. And that's, another point I want to make here is that all propaganda sort of builds off of the propaganda that came before it. So disinformation was actually something that the Soviets pioneered, right? The Soviet Union was really adept at using psychological warfare as a sort of tool to advance their both internal policy agenda, as well as a tool of geopolitics. Right, so the intention was really to construct a sort of a false narrative, right, that is then leaked into the opponent's communication system to deceive the decision-making elite or the public en masse. Now, one piece of disinformation, one campaign that I want to highlight for you that the Soviets ran was called, it's popularly known as Operation Infection. I think the actual name given to it was Operation Denver. This was an idea that was planted originally in an Indian newspaper and then sort of picked up organically by the Soviet press that reported on it, that alleged that the AIDS virus was created in the Pentagon laboratory as a biological weapon against people of color. Right, and this was, of course, at the sort of the beginnings of the AIDS epidemic, when things were really when the public was really concerned about this new virus that was threatening many people's lives. And so using this epidemic, right, exploiting the fear around this epidemic was something that the Soviets used to great effect. And it's something that has a long half-life, right? We still find these ideas circulating in the United States, the idea that that AIDS was a bioweapon, right, created to harm specific populations. And many versions of this story, that were disseminated, for example, like by the Nation of Islam and others, held that Jewish doctors or Zionist doctors were injecting Black Americans with AIDS, right? Now, this too should sound very familiar to you all, having just lived through the sort of COVID pandemic, which still is not fully over. But again, we see the way in which these mass casualty events or pandemics, right, are exploited for various kinds of propaganda. And with COVID too, you had, for example, people like RFK claiming that COVID was created as a biological weapon that targets certain communities, but avoids Chinese and Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish people, right? We see, for example, in the bottom right, the way that this has been co-opted into sort of anti-Israel propaganda, people claiming, using political cartoons and other means, right, that the Israelis are sort of using the COVID-19 virus as a mass weapon against the Palestinian population, as you can see in the cartoon on the bottom right there. Now, the Soviets in particular understood the one form of propaganda that was very powerful is to exploit sort of extant friction in the societies of your opponents, right? So they identified what they called strategic fracture points. And one of the strategic fracture points that they identified was, in the United States in particular, was racism, white supremacy, the history of colonialism, right, and so on in the United States. And they use this to great effect to sort of undermine the standing of the Soviet Union, of the United States in the world, to undermine its ability to certainly form trade relations, diplomatic relations, to get defense contracts, et cetera, particularly in the formerly colonized world, right? People that had suffered under colonialism, under racism and white supremacy were loath to want to form these kinds of relationships with the United States, which the Soviet Union really effectively branded as irredeemably racist. Right. And so the ethnic hatred, racism as a tool of propaganda has a very long history. So this is a quote from one of the highest ranking defectors from Soviet bloc intelligence, the former head of Romanian intelligence, who essentially said that the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, right, which was created by a previous regime, right, which was a right-wing monarchist regime, was picked up by the Soviet propagandists and used as the basis for their anti-Zionist conspiracy theory. And so the plot of that's described in the Protocols of Zion about a global Jewish conspiracy, well, they took that idea, They gave it a sort of leftist, progressive spin. They called it Zionist imperialism, and they churned this propaganda out throughout the world. In other words, connecting the protocols of Zion to Zionism. And in fact, some of the early editions of the protocols were titled the Zionist protocols, right? So if you hear these ideas circulating today, know that this didn't develop organically. There's a very long history of state-sponsored propaganda that disseminated these ideas. Now, I want to highlight another operation called Operation Pandora that was run by the KGB here in the United States. And again, it was intended to use racial division or ethnic enmity to try to rend American society from within, right? So this plan was to plant explosive devices in Black colleges in New York City, and then send out fake communications claiming responsibility or alleging to claim responsibility on behalf of the Jewish Defense League, right? And thereby sort of trying to essentially start a race war between Black and Jewish Americans, right? Again, to undermine U.S. democracy, right? A house divided against itself cannot stand, as the adage goes. And so this was one of the things that they did. The Black and Jewish communities in particular were primary targets for Soviet disinformation campaigns. Now, unfortunately, the FBI engaged in some of these same kinds of activities, using, in fact, Zionism as a kind of wedge issue to divide Black and Jewish Americans. Many of you will recall the fact that the FBI was once no friend of the civil rights movement, right? And so to divide and undermine the movement, they understood they had to divide sort of some of the central leaders of that movement, primarily Black organizers and their Jewish allies, right? We're seeing some of the same kinds of things, some of the same kinds of campaigns being waged today, again, to divide our communities. Now, some of these are certainly being waged by state-level actors, but some are being done by sort of white supremacists and other extremist groups who essentially want us Black and Jewish people to do their work for them, right? If we can get the Jews and Blacks fighting one another, we can sort of just sit back and laugh. And so you see here on screen several kinds of online propaganda that have been disseminated. You can see that they use the ADL logo. Obviously, this wasn't created by ADL, but the idea is a sort of to redirect people to think that this is being promoted by the Jewish community, these ideas that, well, the Holocaust was much worse than Black slavery in the United States. These two cannot be compared. Jewish pain is much more important, right? Obviously, that's going to create a lot of pain and enmity in the Black community if they think that Jews are really sort of promoting these ideas. In other words, this kind of propaganda exploits the two most painful parts of Jewish and Black history, right? The Holocaust on the one hand, and the chattel slavery on the other, right? So using those very painful histories, exploiting them to sort of divide us against one another. Right, so here's another example of that, right? Exploiting slavery to sort of foment anti-Jewish bigotry, right? Claiming that 78% of slave owners in the United States were ethnic Jews, right? Again, that's not going to play well in the Black community. By the way, of course, this has all been debunked by Black scholars, including Henry Louis Gates of Harvard University, who found that there were more slaves owned by one single European Christian sort of slave trading corporation than there were owned by every single Jewish person in the United States, right? So no truth to this, but propaganda isn't really based on facts, right? It's based on a distortion of facts. This is also happening offline, by the way. This is a poster that was put up in a Black neighborhood that essentially uses, leverages the Black Lives Matter slogan to say, never forget Jewish lives matter most, right? Sort of denigrating the value and dignity of Black lives, sort of as if the Jews are saying this. Here is where these campaigns were organized online in places like 4chan, where they talk about exploiting Black Lives Matter, right? Using quotes from Malcolm X, from Farrakhan, from Mandela, right? Talking about Jewish privilege, right? These are white supremacists, right? Again, I want to remind everyone, these are white supremacists talking about how can we exploit pain in the Black and Jewish community and to divide these two communities against one another. Oh, excuse me. Now, white supremacists have been very busy spreading their propaganda. This is the sort of propaganda, offline propaganda efforts that were tabulated by our team at the Center on Extremism. As you can see, they've been very, very busy spreading their propaganda. And this, again, this only counts offline propaganda. When you talk about propaganda online, it's almost impossible to quantify. But here's what some of that looks like in terms of the flyers, the posters that are disseminated, the kind of rallies and demonstrations that are held, the banner drops, right, from overpasses on college and university campuses, alleging, for example, that pornography and sex trafficking are run by Jews, right, using Holocaust denialism, again, alleging that the slave trade was run by Jews, that the media manipulation is controlled by Jews, right, et cetera. Now, I want to talk about sort of what makes social media, right, different from past eras of propaganda delivery. I think it's fair to say that social media has become the greatest delivery mechanism for propaganda that we've ever had in history. There's three factors that I would like to identify as to why that is. And that is ubiquity, immediacy, and anonymity, right? Social media allows us to reach so many different people around the world in a way that was previously impossible, certainly without a Super Bowl ad-sized budget, right? But today, relatively cheaply, relatively quickly, you can create a viral piece of propaganda, and within minutes, it'll make its way all the way around the world, right? The other factor, of course, is anonymity. Before, you had to physically go out and put up posters or things like that, and you might be seen. Social media provides to the propagandist an unprecedented degree of anonymity, so to be able to cover their tracks, right, and cover up the source of this propaganda. So a couple other, I want to talk about some of the techniques of influence that are being used online as well as offline. So one of the techniques that are being used is the co-option of culture, right? Using popular culture, memes, popular TV shows, etc., to spread anti-Jewish ideas, right? So here's a quote from the Daily Stormer. This is the most popular, or certainly one of the most popular and influential white supremacist sites on the internet. And a few years back, their sort of playbook for how they use their internet presence to engage in propaganda was leaked online. So this comes from that playbook. And in it, they say cultural references and attachment of entertainment culture to Nazi concepts have the psychological purpose of removing it from the void of weirdness that it naturally exists in and making it part of the reader's world. Through this method, we are also able to use the existing culture to transmit our own ideas and agenda, right? So again, most people are turned off by Nazism, right, by genocidal sort of rhetoric. But when you attach it to things that people are already familiar with, already comfortable with, you're able to sort of sneak it past the censors, right? So here's an example of a meme based on the popular show 30 Rock, right? Or maybe it was Third Rock from the Sun. I can't recall which show it actually comes from. Apologies. But you see the way that this has been appropriated by white supremacists and other anti-Semites to sort of allege that Jews are imposters. Then they're not really white people, but they're pretending to be white to infiltrate white culture and to destroy the white race from within, right? So the second sort of influence technique that I want to highlight is the strategic use of humor as a tool of propaganda. All right, they liken it to adding cherry flavor to medicine. They say that there should be a conscious agenda to dehumanize the enemy to the point where people are prepared to laugh at their deaths. So it isn't clear that we are doing this, as that would be a turnoff to most normal people. We rely on the lulls. Lulls is internet speak for sort of humorous, ironic, lighthearted content. He continues, the tone of the site should be light. Most people are not comfortable with material that comes across as vitriolic, raging, non-ironic hatred, right? But this is obviously a ploy, he says, and I actually do want to gas kikes. So this is what some of it looks like, right? This image that you see repeated here over and over is the most popular, most widespread anti-Semitic image on the internet. It's called the Happy Merchant. All right, it's a sort of stereotypical Jew that is put into various kinds of memes to communicate various anti-Semitic ideas about Jews as controlling the media, advancing perversion in our society, sex trafficking, pushing people into war, sort of making money off of cancer, off of war, off of all of these terrible things. Right. So here you see the old trope of Jews as the puppet masters, right, controlling the strings of government, of the media, of various global bodies like the United Nations, the EU, etc. The other technique that I want to talk about briefly is our entryism and issue linkage, right? You'll see this a lot when you look at sort of anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian content online. You'll see the way in which people associate Palestine or the pro-Palestinian movement with various other issues that people are already very passionate about in other spaces, right? So things like the environment, right, conservation, feminism, LGBTQ rights, by linking things that people already care about, are already passionate about, to the pro-Palestinian movement. You can sort of get people to get involved in your movement. This is called issues linkage, right, or entryism, where people from one movement enter into another in order to sort of cultivate a base of support and grow their movement by tapping into other already organized spaces, political and cultural spaces. All right, so we talked about that. After 10/7, I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about 10/7 in particular, because we've really seen an explosion of various kinds of propaganda in the aftermath of 10/7, right? So we've seen really a tremendous growth of anti-Semitic propaganda, right? So you can see the rates of exposure, right? That people are being exposed to various kinds of anti-Israel, right? Anti-Palestinian as well, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, and anti-Jewish propaganda online. There are claims that Israel or Jews want to commit genocide against all Palestinians, right? Claims that all Palestinians support Hamas, right, has been weaponized against the Palestinian and Arab community, right, et cetera. So various kinds of ideas have been used to try to sort of steer people to support one or the other direction online. So you can see that on Twitter in particular, or now known as X, there was a tremendous spike in anti-Semitic posts right after October 7th, right? Almost immediately you saw this spike in anti-Semitism, much less so on Facebook, right? But certainly a problem on Twitter. One of the ways that this has happened, one of the sort of ideas that have been weaponized is, again, denialism, right? You'll remember from the film Theresienstadt, the points that I made there is that disinformation and propaganda is not only about getting masses of people to believe falsehoods, it's also getting people to disbelieve things that actually are true, whether it's disbelieving that COVID is real, whether it's disbelieving that vaccines actually protect people from COVID, or whether it's various kinds of denialism about what happened on 10/7, that women were raped, that babies were killed, right? Disinformation that actually maybe this entire thing was a false flag operation. Maybe Israel staged the whole thing, and this slaughter, alleged slaughter of on October 7th never happened, or that it was actually Israelis that committed the slaughter themselves, right? Again, very similar to the kind of ideas we heard in the aftermath of 9/11, where, it was claimed that the US government itself perpetrated 9/11, et cetera. Right. So we see various kinds of, ideas about Zionists being racist, white supremacists, right? Colonialists circulating on social media, and also getting people to take action against Zionists, right? Start Zionist shaming, right? Excluding Zionists from social clubs, from, campus groups, marginalizing them, shaming them, et cetera, right? Various kinds of ideas that seek to marginalize and dehumanize and demonize Zionists, or people who support Israel's right to exist or to defend itself. Right. So we see that there's been an increase in online hate on social media, right, and in various other online spaces over the last number of years. And of course, again, these what happens online, right? The ideas that are spread online create offline harm. It's not that it just hurts Jewish feelings, right? It is things that lead people to actually carry out acts of violence, acts of hate crimes against Jewish people, as we saw in some of those first slides that I shared. Right. And as a result, Jewish people are increasingly hiding their Jewish identity, both online and offline. Jewish students increasingly feel that they are uncomfortable with people knowing that they're Jewish on campus. People are taking off their kippot, they're taking off their Magen David's necklaces and other identifying sort of features that are hiding, right? They feel afraid and they feel like they need to hide their Jewish identity. So here's some of the controversial topics that are being spread, some of the kinds of ideas and narratives that people are being exposed to. And I realize I'm coming up on time, so I'm going to actually fast forward to the last piece that I kind of wanted to talk about, which is the next sort of era of propaganda and disinformation, and that is artificial intelligence, right? We are really at the beginning of the AI revolution, but already we're seeing the ways in which extremists are using AI generated content to spread anti-Jewish ideas, to spread hatred, disinformation, etc. So here are a few, AI generated images, and I wonder what you see. Because some of you are seeing, three blonde women on the left, right, dressed in sort of, in an idyllic setting, right, dressed in white. In the middle, you see maybe a beach wedding. On the right, you see, maybe an image from Jerusalem with paragliders over it. But if you squint, another message emerges. Right? If you squint right now, what you will see in the image on the left is a giant swastika. If you squint the middle image, you will see Adolf Hitler was right about Jews. And if you squint the image on the right, you will see an image of Hitler emerge from the smoke. Right. So these are some of the ways that AI is helping people who are spreading anti-Semitic messages dodge the censors, right? Because most social media companies have terms of service which preclude, which do not allow the spread of hateful content, incitement to violence, incitement to hatred or genocide, right? Various kinds of disinformation are banned on social media networks. And so in order to evade the censors, AI is now being used to hide various kinds of messages within otherwise innocuous looking images, right? It's also, of course, being used to manufacture images of content, scenes that never happened, right? Of course, the image on the left is part of this rhetoric that the Jews were responsible for 9/11, right? And here you see this AI-generated image of a Jewish person holding a detonator, and you see the Twin Towers being blown up in the background. Of course, there wasn't a detonation. There was planes that hit it. On the right, you see images of children being bombed in Gaza by Israel, right, presumably, and these angels sort of coming over them. Now, obviously, these are AI-generated images. Anybody who looks at this automatically sees that these are not photographs. These are images that are generated by AI. But does it matter? I would argue that it doesn't, because these images nonetheless communicate ideas, right? Simply identifying something as AI generated, as not real, isn't sufficient to strip it of its power to influence, right? For example, historically, we know that the Nazi regime knew that the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion was a fabrication. Right, it wasn't a real, authentic document that of the Jews alleging, that the Jews had this plan for global domination. They knew it was fake, but they used it nonetheless because they said, well, it still has a truth at its core, and it's still a powerful piece of propaganda that we can use to great effect. Right, so some of these efforts that are now being implemented to try to identify images as being AI generated, that's not going to be sufficient, right? It's not going to be able to stop people using AI to spread propaganda. Now, just as a last point, why haven't tech companies done more to try to address this, to curtail the spread of hateful propaganda online? I would identify four primary factors. First, the profit motive, right? On social media, it's actually not that different from what we had in past eras. Many of you are familiar with the adage, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Which applies to newspapers, printing sort of the most sensational content, really sort of headlines that will grab people's attention in order to sell papers, right? Sensationalism sells. When Jews and Muslims are getting along, that's not exciting. But when Jews and Muslims are, at each other's throats, killing one another, that sells papers, right? On social media, you have the same kind of phenomenon. So algorithms drive people to more and more extreme content, right? As a way to monetize people's rage, their outrage, right? Their sort of rage posting and commenting, getting into debates and arguments with one another. That's actually something that social media companies profit from, and something we've been advocating with them, that they need to step up and be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. The second issue is scale, right? There is roughly 500 hours of new video posted to YouTube every single minute, right? How do you moderate that amount of content? There's no army in the world that can sort of filter all of that content and remove things that are in violation of the terms of service. In order to do that, the tools, we need tools, right? Moderation teams need tools, but the tools are inadequate. Right now, the tools, machines are not great at understanding when a shekel is just a shekel and a bagel is just a bagel, and when it's not. Anti-Semitism is highly contextual, and the tools that we have are not sophisticated enough yet, although they may be very soon, to be able to adequately help us deal with this. And lastly, the law actually protects social media companies. There's Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act essentially says that what is posted on these platforms, the companies are not responsible for, right? And so this is something that people have been rethinking, right? Because essentially it allows companies like Twitter, like Facebook, to say like, well, yeah, these people are posting terrible, genocidal content on our platforms, and we're helping to promote it and get it out to the broader world, but it's not, you can't hold us accountable for that. So the law, I think, in the next few years will be changing to sort of accommodate, what the concerns of the American people, which are saying increasingly they want tech companies to step up and do something about what's happening on their platforms. All right, so I'm going to throw up my last slide, and that is some tips for engaging and disengaging online. I'm going to keep it up as we turn it over to Q&A. I'm not going to go through each of these, but just know that there's a lot of content on ADL.org, on artificial intelligence, on social media disinformation, ways that you can protect yourself, your families, your young people in your life online, and how to be savvy in terms of doing your own online advocacy, if that is something you choose to do. So thank you very much, and let's turn it over to Q&A.
All right, so we have a few questions in the chat that I'm going to pose to you, Vlad. The first one is saying that you earlier showed a few ads that were edited to look as if they were being shared by the ADL. This person is saying that those logos looked very real. It looked like a synthesized ad campaign. How can we distinguish between that sort of content and actual content from the ADL or any other organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's no easy answer to it. I would say that you should scrutinize everything, right? You should be very circumspect about anything that you find online. And you should always try to source it, to sort of fact check it against multiple sources, right? Increasingly social media creates echo chambers, right? Where we only receive content that is that the algorithm thinks we want to see, right? So if you are sort of, Jewish, you're pro-Israel, et cetera, you're going to be served up a lot of that kind of content because the algorithms know that's what you want to see, right? That's what you're most likely to share, to engage with, to post and comment on, et cetera. But that is also problematic, right? Because then we sort of get pushed into these silos where we only see content that sort of that the algorithm thinks aligns with our ideology or worldview, and that's really problematic if we want to have a sober, objective perspective about the world and what's going on in it. So I would say, defer to credible news organizations, news outlets. There are a number of, sort of fact-checking operations that you can avail yourself of. There's Media Matters, for example, that looks at the ways in which certain kind of narratives are spreading online, and has a lot of tools for how you can, be more savvy as a consumer of online and other content. And we have a lot of that also, again, on ADL.org. So if you go to ADL.org and search some of these search terms, right, around social media, artificial intelligence, media literacy, you're going to find some great resources that you can, avail yourself of to become a little bit more savvy as a consumer of information.
Great. And then the next question that we have is, you showed earlier in your presentation a slide showing that there was a stronger uptick in anti-Semitic or hateful content on Twitter as opposed to other social media platforms like Facebook, for example. What accounts for the difference in prevalence and trends across these different tech giants?
The decisions made by the tech companies themselves, right? Since Elon Musk took over, Twitter, we have seen an increase in this kind of content, and that shouldn't be surprising when you invite people who were previously banned from Twitter back onto Twitter. People who, with a known history of using these platforms to spread white supremacist, anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, COVID-19 denying disinformation. When you let those people back onto your platform, you're going to get more of that kind of content. It's not rocket science, right? There's been a way in which on certain platforms, the sort of standards by which content is moderated have been sort of demolished, right? That is also to do with the fact that there have been mass layoffs in terms of the policy, like the moderation teams, the people that are actually supposed to, sort of filter content to respond to when we report, right, that we've seen a piece of extremist content, disinformation, incitement to genocide or whatever online. There are teams that are supposed to look at those reports and determine whether it does in fact violate their terms of service, and if it does, to take down the content, and in some cases, if this is a repeat offender, to take more drastic action to remove them from the platform either temporarily or permanently. Well, there's been mass layoffs from these moderation teams, right, in some of these social media companies. So as a result of that, you're going to have much more of a free-for-all, right? People can come on these platforms and post a lot of things that previously they would not be able to post, or that would get taken down very quickly. So in part, it's simply just the decisions being made by some of the executives at these companies. Whether these companies put profit first, or whether they put the interest, the greater interest of the American people and the broader world of democracy first, determines sort of, in a way, not to be too grandiose about it, but determines the trajectory of human history.
Well, I'm going to allow us to end with that. Unfortunately, we are up against time. But Vlad, first of all, I want to thank you for your time today and for joining us. I want to remind all of our audience today that this webinar has been recorded, so we will be sharing a link afterwards that you can forward to any friends or family who wanted to be here. Feel free to share it with your social circles as you wish. Another reminder that our next program, Trauma and Atrocity, the Boundaries of Understanding and Emotion, will delve into the deep and messy emotional responses that traumatic news events inspire. So very related to the events and themes that we discussed today. That will be on April 3rd, and we hope that you will continue to join us as we add more and more programs of interest to this series. And last but not least, if this program was valuable to you, your donations will help us continue this important education. So we look forward to seeing you all soon. Once again, a big round of applause and thank you to Vlad Khaykin for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.